Thanks a lot for joining us today. We've got a really interesting story here about Anthony Tony Collins, who took Rochdale to their first and only major final. It's the 26th of April 1962 and 11,123 fans have been packed out the Spotland Stadium in Rochdale. Two teams take the pitch for the League Cup final. 4th Division Rochdale are in their first major final in the club's history after an astonishing run, their first chance at silverware. Dale manager Anthony Tony Norman Collins has made history as the first manager in the game to reach the final from the 4th Division, but he's about to achieve something else, something that cannot be put into a trophy cabinet. He leads the team out as the first black man to manage Rochdale. Dig a little more and you'll find out that he's the first black man to manage an English major final. Go through all the archives possible and you'll learn he's actually the first black man to manage in English football at all. From growing up in London to being stationed in Italy during World War II and then lighting up the left wing for a handful of clubs, Collins' rise to the top of the game wasn't simple. Today, there are still only 7 black managers among 92 Premier League and Football League clubs, but Collins was doing it almost 60 years ago. In a decade in which support for Britain's National Front Party gained momentum and Enoch Powell's infamous Rivers of Blood speech was delivered, Collins' achievement of being the Football League's first black manager in the 1960-61 season should not be underestimated. But yet, outside of the clubs that Collins managed or played for, his story has often been marginalised. Many know the names of the first black players in Britain and heroes from the 1960s and 70s like Viv Anderson and Clyde Best. Less celebrated is the story of the first black manager. Due to the stigma of having a child out of wedlock in Kensington in 1926 with a white mother and a black father, Lou Collins decided that her parents, Kit and Wilfred Collins, would be better suited to raising her child. It was here that the early family life at their rented property at 397 Portobello Road began to shape a football pioneer. He was the same as his brothers and sisters and the rest of his family, as far as they were concerned, apart from the obvious differences. Collins' daughter Sarita says, Collins always referred to his 5 brothers and sisters, though they were his aunties and uncles actually. With them being older, they protected him, and he was a very strong character, very charismatic. He became head boy at school, so he led all the way through his life, Sarita continued. Head boy became private 1473535 when Collins was enlisted in the army upon receiving his call-up letter in 1944. Camaraderie was a big thing in his unit. References to where you were born or how you spoke were often used against you. It was inevitable that his skin tone would become a target, but Collins soon ensured that was not to last. A keen boxer as a young adult, his trainer at the gym once pleaded to Kit that she should let Collins come back to boxing as there was money in his left hand. One scuffle later and Collins had underlined he was not to be messed with in the army. At age 21, in 1947, Collins was honourably released from his services. At 5'9" and extremely light of foot, it was football that beckoned. It just so happened that a young private by the name of Ibbotson had written to Eric Taylor, the manager of Sheffield Wednesday at the time, who upon hearing the recommendation invited Collins down for a trial. One trial enough, wrote one newspaper reporter after seeing Collins turn out for the Owls, with the young footballer signed up as a professional shortly after. He would never make a first team appearance for Wednesday, a player deemed good enough by many observers but not by the coaching staff. His experience at the club wasn't an easy one, and despite a good relationship with Taylor, the other coaches weren't as accepting. Back then, players only had one pair of boots, and Collins's were far too small for him. Despite asking for another size, his request was never granted, leading to incredible pain in his feet and the loss of toenails. We all know why Tony was treated like that. Looking back, it's obvious. He was the only one who had to go through that, said Sarita. He would never say it was his colour of skin though. He never wanted that to be an excuse. The excruciating pain and lack of opportunity meant a move to York City in the 3rd Division North. After York, Collins joined several clubs including Watford, Norwich, Torquay and Crystal Palace, becoming the first black player to appear for the Eagles in 1957. He joined his final club as a player of Rochdale in June 1959, the club where the managerial career of football's master spy was born. Following manager Jack Marshall's move to Blackburn, Collins was pushed by teammates to apply for the vacant position. He had earned the complete respect of his white teammates at a time where this did not come easy for a black man in white British society. Sarita continues, he was a strong character, but he was a gentleman. You wouldn't cross him. It was like he was made of iron. He wouldn't pull his punches. He told it how it was, and that's why he was able to stay as long in the game. People want decisions. People want to define action, and that's what he gave. A £1,250 salary was agreed, and on the 5th of September 1961, upon taking the full role at Rochdale, Collins became the Football League's first black manager. It took just 1 year for him to guide the club to the only major final in their history, but 2nd Division Norwich proved too strong, winning 4-0. Since then, only one other club has made it to the League Cup final from the 4th tier, with Bradford losing 5-0 to Premier League Swansea in 2013. A frustrated tactician, Collins would take his inspiration from Brazil and continental Europe, attempting 4-2-4 and 3-3-1-3 formations, but a lack of funding meant the cup final was his ceiling. Issues that plague 2021 Rochdale also affected them in the 60s, with the splits at board level, financial problems and differing ideas of how the club should be run. This began to manifest itself on the pitch. Rochdale narrowly missed out on promotion to the 3rd Division in 1964-65, but in the following 2 seasons, the club had to be re-elected back into the league due to a 21st place finish. In October 1967, Collins left Rochdale. He felt his hands were tied, there was little recruitment and his tactical mind could not be put to use. The town of Rochdale was his heart though, and there was no moving from his house on Edenfield Road with his wife Edith and his 3 kids. It was Collins' ability to spot a player that meant Rochdale would be his last full managerial appointment. To ensure he could still live at home in the Greater Manchester town, he would have a backroom role that would elevate Collins to the legacy he has now. In 1968, he found himself as assistant manager to Alan Dix at Bristol City. He would also go up and down the country on scouting missions, with the press finding it unusual that Collins lived 180 miles from the club. The situation he found himself in was good. His reputation was growing, and this meant he was regularly called up for television interviews. The scouting was working. Players such as Jerry Gow, Tom Ritchie, Dickie Rook were all signs of this, but similarly to Rochdale, boardroom struggles were problematic. Collins elevated to chief scout at Leeds United under the great Don Revie, where he built a network of scout spying, as it was called, for him. He was just like a walking encyclopedia, Sarita remembers. He would remember what happened in any game, and I've spent many hours in the background listening to him on the phone going through it. It was different spying in Europe at the time. Language barriers and simply not knowing who players were was usually an issue for clubs, but Colin understood the value of these reports. One of my most absorbing trips was to Hungary, he wrote in his notes. It was to watch our European second round opponents, Ujpest Dossa, I had to go alone and do my own job, the club secretary and public relations officer's role. In Europe, we have got to be right first time, especially when you take into consideration the money being spent on the trip and the prize that could be at stake. Collins' attention to detail helped Leeds reach the European Cup final under Jimmy Armfield in 1975, where they lost 2-0 to Bayern Munich amid a flurry of controversial refereeing decisions. Now Reeve was England manager, and due to Collins' domestic and European pedigree, he enlisted his services at national level for England to be their master spy, compiling match and player reports at every detail. Collins would later embark on a second spell at Bristol City and Leeds before joining Manchester United, where he and a little-known Alex Ferguson did not see eye to eye. An early meeting between the two, where Collins' Bristol City beat Ferguson's St Mirren, was to blame, as well as Manchester United missing out on the signing of John Barnes. Several minor roles followed, but at the age of 80, the domestic, European and national spy hung up his notepad. He was just ahead of his time, says Sarita of her father, who passed away aged 94 in February. If you compare with the video analysis now, where they can just freeze things and go back over it again and again, he had one go in 90 minutes to do a player report. Little was known about the inner workings of the football master spy, the Football League's first black manager. This is how he worked best, in the shadows, conducting business. Collins' journey took him from organising friendlies against POWs in the war to the European Cup finals, to the closest Rochdale ever came to Cup silverware. Along the way, he inadvertently became a trailblazer.